Okay, we have three commissioners with us. Commissioners Washington and Dorner will be absent today. So we have our quorum. The time is 10:02, and I'll call the June 30th, 2022 Planning Board meeting to order. Again, we have the following board members with us. We have Vice Chair Bailey and Commissioner Giraldo and myself, Chair Shapiro. And on to the business at hand. Please note that the deadline for all participant pre-registration and for all submission materials and exhibits was 12 noon on the Tuesday before this planning board meeting. Registered speakers may join the meeting with the link provided via email provided by the planning board office or listen by phone by utilizing the call-in number provided in the email. Of course, anyone may tune in to watch the planning board meeting via live stream. If you wish to speak or become a person of record, you may use our online web form that you see referenced on the screen in front of you. In addition, commissioners are joined by David Warner, our principal counsel, Jessica Jones, our planning board administrator, Marie Proctor, our senior technical hearing writer, is with us, and Mr. James Hunt, Division Chief, Development Review Division, is with us as well, and the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Derek Lodge, is with us as well. Other staff members, Kenneth Flanagan, who's going to guide us through the exhibits, and Ryan Cron, who is our technical guru, who's helping us, as always, behind the scenes. Our first item is an administrative item. This is a resolution of appreciation for a retiree, or a soon-to-be retiree, for Laura Connolly. This is a resolution of appreciation number 2022-74. Ms. Connolly was a planner for with the Prince George's County Department of Parks and Recreation. She's retiring from the commission effective today after 23 years of service. She served in multiple roles within the Park Planning and Development Division, a planning coordinator, an acting master planner, an acting planning supervisor. She served as the lead environmental planner for the department. Quite a storied career. She's collaborated with key staff from municipal, county, state, federal agencies on behalf of the commission. She was a team member for the watershed implementation plan. She represented DPR and initiatives like MagLev and the Intercounty Connector and managed lane study. Throughout her commission career, she earned many performance awards and was recognized for her contributions to the department and community in all sorts of ways. Just a great career with the commission, and we're very much appreciative. I don't know if commissioners, if any of you have a personal contact with her that you want to chime in as well, but if not, then I will turn it to you to take action on this resolution of appreciation.
Mr. Chairman, move that resolution with tons of gratitude for her service.
Thank you.
Echo those comments, and I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the resolution. And this is resolution 2022-74. And I will call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey?
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo?
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 3-0. Ms. Connolly, thank you for all of your service. Next item on the agenda is a draft minutes from June 16th, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the draft minutes?
Motion to approve draft minutes.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Under discussion, we're having a technical issue with Commissioner Giraldo. I can see him fine, but he is frozen. And either that or he's not moving at all.
I sure am frozen.
Do others see him frozen? Yeah.
Yeah, I see myself frozen.
Okay.
But we can hear you.
We can hear you just fine. So the motion and the second is to approve the draft minutes. No further discussion. I'll call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey?
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo?
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it. The draft minutes from June 16, 2022 are approved. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have a number of consent agenda items, items 4A and 4B, and then items 4D through 4I. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda in accordance with the recommendation of the staff.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, I'll call the roll. Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
And I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 3-0. The consent agenda is approved and all the items on it. Let's see if we can take a second here. Just give ourselves a pause and see if we can correct the issue with Commissioner Giraldo.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, Mr. Chair, is sign off and sign back on very quickly. Okay.
All right. We're all going to take a quick pause.
Thank you.
We are on to regular agenda items. Want to run through the order of items. We're going to do item 6 first, which is actually a application that's been withdrawn. I'll talk about it in a second. After 6, we'll do items 9. Then we'll do item 5, 7, 8. So 6, 9, 5, 7, 8. That's the order of business. So item 6 is first regular item. It's a preliminary plan of subdivision.
Chair Shapiro?
Yes.
Pardon me, David Warner, Principal Counsel. We also have item 3A to consider, the legislation. Which,
I think Mr. Warner, we're going to be taking that up next week, not today.
oh, pardon me. Thank you.
We had discussing it today, but it's going to be postponed.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So item 6, preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21030, preserving Piscataway Bailey's Villas. This is being withdrawn at the request of the applicant, so there's no action needed for this item. So moving on to item 9. This is preliminary plan 4-21039 Eco-Grads. The attorney for this case is Mr. Tedesco. The staff reviewer is Ms. Gupta. And we have some other speakers on this as well from the City of College Park, but I will turn it over to Ms. Gupta for the staff presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just doing a sound check. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Thanks for checking.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, I am Mridula Gupta with the subdivision section. Item number 9 on the agenda is a preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21039 titled Eco-Grads. The subject preliminary plan of subdivision proposes one parcel for 123 multifamily dwelling units and 2,300 square feet of commercial use. As a matter of housekeeping, the additional backup includes one exhibit received from the applicant prior to June 28th deadline and one staff exhibit. Next slide, please. The site is located in the northwestern area of Prince George's County within Planning Area 66 and Council District 3. Next slide, please. More specifically, the site is located in the southeast quadrant of intersection of US 1, that's Baltimore Avenue, and Quebec Street in the city of College Park. Next slide, please. The image to the left shows that the subject site, outlined in red, is located in the local transit-oriented edge zone. The surrounding properties are located in the local transit-oriented edge, neighborhood activity center, and the residential single-family 65 zones. The property's zoning notwithstanding, this preliminary plan of subdivision was accepted for review prior to April 1, 2022, and is therefore reviewed under the prior zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations pursuant to section 24-1703A of the subdivision regulations. Under the prior zoning ordinance, this site is in the mixed-use infill zone as shown in the image to the right. This preliminary plan of subdivision was evaluated according to the standards of that zone. Next slide, please. The site is currently not located in any overlay zone. Under the prior zoning ordinance, however, the site is located in the Development District Overlay Zone and subject to the 2010 approved Central US 1 Corridor Sector Plan and Sectional Map Amendment. Next slide, please. The aerial photograph shows that the site outlined in red is currently vacant. In general, the commercial development abuts the subject site except to the east, which is developed with institutional use. Next slide, please. The site map shows the site, which is delineated in pink, slopes evenly to the southwest corner. Next slide, please. This is the bird's eye view of the property, which is outlined in red, looking eastward. US 1 is located along the lower edge of the slide. Access to the property is available from Quebec Street, seen here on the left, and an undeveloped alley located behind the property. Next slide, please. This slide shows the master plan right-of-way of US 1, highlighted in blue, which is classified as a major collector and is located to the west of the site. Next slide, please. The critical intersections determined to be impacted by the development are shown as yellow squares on this slide. The analysis performed by staff found that all critical intersections will operate at adequate levels of service or better given the proposed development. Next slide, please. The subject property falls within the central US 1 corridor and is therefore subject to a finding of pedestrian and bikeway adequacy pursuant to section 24-124.01 of the prior subdivision regulations. This slide shows the proposed off-site pedestrian and bicycle improvements. The first improvement includes installation and or upgrading pavement markings along the College Park Trolley Trail between Greenbelt Road and Bourbon House Road, highlighted on this slide in orange to the right of the site. The second improvement includes installing sharrows along Pontiac Street, also highlighted here in orange to the south side of the property. Staff find that the proposed off-site improvements are within the cost cap and acceptable. Next slide, please. This slide shows the outline of the new parcel in red and public rights-of-way are shaded in purple. Dedication of public right-of-way along US 1 is required for the proposed development and is shown on this slide in blue. Pedestrian-only access is proposed to US 1 and 2 vehicular points of access are proposed, one to Quebec Street and the other to the public alley. Adequate public facilities, including water, sewer, police, police, schools, fire, and rescue are available to serve the subject site. The subject property is located within Aviation Policy Area 6, within the proximity of the College Park Airport. A condition of approval is included to require disclosure notification to the future residents regarding the proximity of the subdivision to an airport. Section 24-122A of the subdivision regulations requires that 10-foot wide public utility easements be provided along both sides of all public rights-of-way, but the applicant has requested a variation to this section and does not propose to provide the easements along the public rights-of-way fronting the subject site. The required findings for approval of this variation request were made in accordance with section 24-113A and are further detailed on pages 15 to 18 in the staff report. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, additional backup includes one staff exhibit and one applicant's exhibit. Staff Exhibit 1 is a memo received from the City of College Park dated June 22nd, 2022, which includes the city's conditions of approval of this preliminary plan of subdivision. Staff has reviewed those conditions and find that conditions 1 to 4 are similar to staff's recommended conditions 2, 6, 9, and 8 respectively. City's recommended condition 3 relates to off-site pedestrian and bicycle improvements pursuant to section 24-124.01 of the prior subdivision regulations. The BPIS did not evaluate the feasibility of this recommended improvement and further did not assess if this facility is within the cost cap. As such, staff cannot recommend this improvement as a BPIS condition. Condition 6A is similar to staff's recommended condition 5B, related to requirement of a public use easement agreement with the city for the public use of any portion of sidewalk located on the subject property. City's condition 5 relates to the public alley, for which the city is the operating agency. Any required agreement for the construction and maintenance of this alley would be between the city and the applicant and would be addressed prior to the applicant obtaining their city permits. Conditions 6B to 6F pertain to operation, maintenance, and management issues, which are not relevant to the preliminary plan of subdivision review and are more appropriate as subjects of discussion between the applicant and the city. Conditions 6G and H pertain to design-related issues and will be further addressed at the time of detailed site plan. Applicant Exhibit 1 includes proposed revisions to staff's recommended conditions of approval. Specifically, the applicant has suggested revisions to condition 10 and deletion of condition 11, both of which appear on page 24 of the staff report. Conditions 10 and 11 pertain to the required on-site pedestrian and bicycle improvements. Staff reviewed the suggested revisions and concur with the revised condition 10 and deletion of condition 11. Staff note that the detailed site plan DSP-21024 for this site has been accepted, and these revisions to staff's recommended conditions are appropriate to reflect the information provided with the accepted DSP. Staff also notes that there is an error in the staff report on page 21 of finding 13 in the paragraph titled Conformance with the Prince George's County Tree Canopy Coverage Ordinance. The minimum tree canopy coverage requirement is calculated based upon a larger site area, and if the board pleases, the staff will make appropriate corrections to finding 13. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff recommends that the planning board adopt the findings and approve the preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21039 and a variation from section 24-122A, subject to the conditions found on pages 22 through 25 of the staff report, as revised by applicant's Exhibit 1, and correction to the site acreage and the tree canopy coverage requirement in finding 13. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta. Are there questions for Ms. Gupta before we turn to the applicant?
Yeah, just one quick question, Mr. Chair. In speaking about the conditions recommended from the city, which were the ones that you said were similar to the conditions already in the staff report?
Yes, Commissioner, these were conditions 1 to 4 and 6A.
1 through 4.
Yes, ma'am.
And 6A.
And
Madam
6A.
Vice.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? No further questions for staff. Turn to Mr. Tedesco. You've heard the staff report. Staff is recommending approval of conditions and with some minor corrections as well. And we have the City of College Park here as well. Mr. Tedesco, anything you'd like to bring to us?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Good morning, Matthew Tedesco with the law firm of McNamee Hosey. Here on behalf of the applicant Kind Build LLC. Just by way of introduction, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I did want to introduce who we have with us this morning on behalf of the applicant and its design team. On behalf of the applicant Kind Build LLC, we have Mr. Mark Manzo. Kim Engineering is the civil engineer on the project, represented by Karen Carpenter, and Mike Lenhart with Lenhart Traffic Consulting is with us as well. We had additional members of the team sign up, but are not available to attend this morning's hearing. Those included representatives from Niles Bolton and from DW Kazera, who are other members of the team. So I just want to publicly thank them for their efforts in this case. More importantly, I want to thank Ms. Gupta and her review. As you can tell from your staff report as well as the presentation this morning, Ms. Gupta, as always, has done an extremely thorough job in evaluating this case and providing recommendations to you all, for which we align ourselves with Ms. Gupta's staff report and presentation to include the modifications that were requested in applicant's Exhibit 1, which staff is in agreement with those changes. And just for additional clarity, those changes merely only reflect the fact that the detailed site plan has been accepted and is currently under review. So those are just more or less some housekeeping corrections or modifications to conditions. Finally, Mr. Chair, I would align myself with Ms. Gupta's analysis and summary with respect to the city's requested conditions as they relate to conditions that have been reflected in your staff report. And the ones that haven't, I would further align myself with the reasons that Ms. Gupta gave for why they're not. That being said, we have worked very closely with the City of College Park for many, many months on this project, and will continue to do so with respect to the detailed site plan. So although some of those items, as Ms. Gupta indicated, are for future discussion between us and the city, separate and apart from planning board's involvement in this preliminary plan, we do publicly want to acknowledge our efforts with the city and thank Ms. Shum and Ms. Bader, who were on the line representing the city. We've, again, as you can imagine, have worked very closely with them as well as your technical staff. And with that, Mr. Chair, we would just further align ourselves and submit on the variation request that was requested with respect to the PUE, and just incorporate and adopt as further testimony this morning in the interest of time, pages 3 through 8 in your backup, which was our justification, and then as well as the findings that staff made with respect to the variations to the PUE. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we're really just here to answer any other questions you all may have. And again, want to thank staff for its very thorough and technical review of this case, which we respectfully request the board's approval of with conditions as modified by applicant's Exhibit 1.
Thank you, Mr. Tedesco. We have Ms. Shum from the City of College Park. Good to see you again. Before we go to Ms. Shum, any questions for Mr. Tedesco?
I have none.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shum, good to see you. If you have something you'd like to add, we would love to hear you.
I do, and it's good to see you too. It's been a while, so I just want to take a moment to congratulate you on this appointment, because this is the first time we're seeing each other since that happened. So good morning to you and congratulations. Good morning to the rest of the board. My name is Terry Shum. I'm the Director of Planning for the City of College Park, and I'm here representing the City Council's position on this project, which was a unanimous vote of the council to support this project with conditions. Most of our conditions, as you've heard, generally align with your staff's recommendation. I do want to maybe ask for clarification on one item, and that is number 3C in the city's letter and number 9B in your technical staff report. So this relates to the BPIS improvements. So an additional request the City Council has made is for Sharrow lane markings that already exist on Berwyn Road in the city but are very faded, that they be refreshed under this requirement. So the feasibility, I think, is not an issue because the Sharrows are already there. Given the itemized cost provided by the applicant's engineer, refreshing 22 Sharrows could be accommodated under the cost cap here. So we ask that that condition be added to your staff's recommendation. And then there's one thing I wanted to mention, and that relates to item 10A in the staff report. This is really direction that's provided for detailed site plan when that comes before you. But 10A says that a cycle track should be provided along the frontage of this property. However, the State Highway Administration is in the process of reconstructing Route 1, and they are adding a 6-foot bike lane to the road. So with that accommodation, a cycle track, I think, would be redundant across the frontage, although it is called out as the preferred treatment in the U.S. Route 1 sector plan and is being accommodated south of College Avenue, where the state highway project is not being constructed. So that's all I have. I appreciate your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shum. Appreciate it. I'll certainly direct commissioners if you don't have any questions. I want to hear from Ms. Gupta and Mr. Tedesco on the issues that Ms. Shum brought up. But any other questions that you may have for the City of College Park?
Mr. Chair, it's fine if you give it to Ms. Gupta and Mr. Tedesco to address, because I wasn't sure really what College Park's position was with respect to that condition.
Okay. And the bike track issue will be addressed later in our processing. That's not relevant to this preliminary plan, to your point, as you brought up. But we're here, and we might as well hear from staff and Mr. Tedesco on that point anyhow. And then the other issue around refreshing the Sharrows on Pontiac Street. Ms. Gupta, Mr. Tedesco.
I don't know in which order, Mr. Chairman, so I'll defer, but I'm happy to provide applicant's response to Ms. Shum's comments and/or wait for Ms. Gupta and respond accordingly, however you prefer.
Why don't we have you go first?
Thank you. So I would definitely 100% align myself with Ms. Shum's comments with respect to 10A. That is something that we are going to be talking about with the detailed site plan, but again, would agree that it would be a redundant ask. We did not request a modification to condition 10A in particular because it provides the unless modified by the operating agency with written correspondences. And so that gives us, I think, from the preliminary plan perspective, some flexibility to work with the city as well as SHA. But similarly, as was approved on a project on the east side where the cycle track was not required, we would align ourselves with Ms. Shum's comments. And again, for a future conversation, but I publicly, for the record, did want to state that we agree with Ms. Shum on that in that regard. With respect to the BPIS condition in your staff report, in particular, your indulgence.
9B.
Not 9B. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, actually, 9B is the same as 3B in the city's memo. What the city is asking for is that it's 3C, the repaint 22 Sharrow Lane markings along Berwyn Road be added to your staff report. Publicly, the applicant has no objection to that. However, I would defer to Ms. Gupta and to your transportation planning staff as far as its determinations on why that they did not feel that was appropriate to be included. We'll defer to the board's will on that as far as any conclusions that you all may make. I think it would be within the cost cap, notwithstanding the other two improvements, but understanding staff's position as far as feasibility and analysis of that. I don't want to speak to that because that's their purview, but we would not otherwise have any strong objection to having that included. We agreed to it with the city on June 21st, understanding it was up to the board's discretion and/or staff's recommendation. So.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Tedesco, or I'll turn it over to Ms. Gupta. No? Ms. Gupta?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I would ask the transportation planning staff, I think Mr. Capers is online, regarding condition 10A and condition 9 regarding BPIS improvements.
Mr. Capers?
I don't think he's on, but so considering condition 10A, I agree with Ms. Shum and Mr. Tedesco that this condition is essentially subject to the operating agency along Route 1, which is the state highway. And this condition 10A was based on the evaluation of the subdivision based on the sector plan, the US 1 corridor sector plan. And the sector plan had these recommendations for the standard street section along US 1. So in the end, it's we are cognizant that State Highway has a plan for this area. They are in construction, and the construction is proposed to be complete by, I believe, next year. So this will be reviewed again at the time of DSP about the feasibility, and as agreed upon by the State Highway. And regarding BPIS, essentially, condition the additional request in the cities, that again, it was based on the transportation planning's review and feasibility of this additional improvement.
Thank you, Ms. Gupta. Mr. Hunt, I think we saw Mr. Capers jump off and then we lost him again.
Yes, Mr. Chair, he is on. I think he's trying to get on just now. May have some technical issues back there. Should be getting on just a second.
Yeah, no problem. Audio only is fine too, if that works.
Okay.
But it sounds like it's clear.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting for Mr. Capers to get on, I guess I have a question for our council. So what I'm understanding is that since there's going to be deference to the State Highway Authority with regard to the 3C, I guess, there's enough room in there that we would not have a double lane?
Well,
I mean, 10A.
I think I understand your question.
Redundant. 10A. I'm sorry, Mr. Warner.
So with regard to 10A, that condition requires what sounds to me from the testimony I heard is a slightly wider bicycle track that may or may not be feasible depending on what SHA decides. That's an appropriate condition, and it has the assurances that we need as well as the developer needs.
So it's not redundant. So it's not redundant.
Right. It's actually requiring a slightly wider bicycle track, but SHA may say, it sounds like SHA is going to look for a 6-foot wide bicycle track, in which case, if they do decide that, then that will satisfy this condition, which right now says 6.5 feet.
Okay.
Which is fine.
And again, this will all be taken up at DSP as well.
Yes.
Right.
And we have Mr. Capers.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the planning board. My apologies, I'm having technical issues.
So the only issue is the Sharrows on Berwyn. I think refreshing the Sharrows on Berwyn. I think that's where we're at. And the question is, the applicant is happy to do it. City of College Park wants it done, but it's not in the staff report. I think I'm summarizing that accurately. And so any objection to including in the staff report that that part of the bike ped improvements will be refreshing the Sharrows on Berwyn Road.
Yes, Mr. Chair, my apologies. I wasn't a part of the original discussion, but just to answer your question based on the information you provided, if the Sharrows along Burn House Road are part of the BPIS requirement, we will further need to evaluate it to ensure that it meets the standards and specifically the cost cap that the subdivision regulation established. We will have to do that a part of this process.
And again, it's just refreshing them. So we're talking about paint.
I understand, but there is a cost associated with Mr. Chair, and I know that they had a small cost cap associated with this particular project based on the regulations, but I can't make a decision on that now without looking at the improvement and the cost associated with it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
David Warner, Principal Counsel. We did hear testimony from the applicant that, or the applicant's attorney, that the cost of refreshing 22 or so Cheryl Lane markings would fit within the BPIS. Excuse me, cost cap.
And in fairness to Mr. Capers, he wants to make his analysis based on their own, his recommendation based on their own analysis. So I'm not sure that we can ask them to count on that without doing their own analysis. I don't know, Mr. Capers, I imagine that's your position. I'm not sure that.
Yes, that is my position, Mr. Chair. What I will recommend, if it's the pleasure of the board and also the applicant is accepted, if we have in the past, we have allowed, or the board has approved conditions where the applicant could provide additional analysis prior to the certification of the subdivision in terms of BPIS, if we could further evaluate it. So I recommend that is an avenue to which we could still evaluate the cost cap for this proposed improvement within the preliminary plan process according to the subdivision regulations.
Any objections?
I didn't, Mr. Chairman, that's a question to the applicant. I'm familiar with what Mr. Capers is suggesting. We've had similar language on a condition, actually for another project in College Park a few weeks ago. So, I'd be happy with the board's approval, obviously, work through that language prior to a resolution. But I believe what Mr. Capers is suggesting would be acceptable, subject to the cost cap and prior, with that additional analysis that he is seeking, that we can provide, and assuming that it's within the cost cap, it would be implemented. If it's not, then it won't be a required BPIS improvement. But I think that gives the flexibility to address Ms. Shum's desires and the city's desires, as well as addresses Mr. Capers' concerns with respect to analysis. And then it certainly gives the applicant the protection to make sure we're not imposing conditions, one, that we can't do, or two, exceed the cost cap. So I would have no objection, would welcome the opportunity to finalize that language consistent with similar conditions along those same lines.
Right, Ms. Shum, I imagine that's satisfactory for you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from staff around this, or do we feel like we have a plan of action? Good? Okay.
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So thanks, everybody. Commissioners, any further questions for staff or for any?
I guess I'm not clear about the language. So would it be that condition 3C would be added subject to analysis by staff?
I was going to say, Mr. Warner, I was going to turn to you on that to answer Commissioner Giraldo's question. Is that how we should phrase this if we are to take action on this?
Yeah, I think you've made, the board's made itself clear as to what they intend here. So is the applicant, so is Mr. Capers. So when this resolution comes back, I think we have adequate information in the record to properly draft that third condition, which would be something in 9C that says something along the lines that you are suggesting, Mr. Giraldo, which is to repaint approximately 22 Sharrows, subject to staff analysis of the BPIS and the cost cap, something along those lines.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else before us on this, I want to thank everybody for your participation. And this hearing is closed, and turn to my fellow commissioners, and what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, based upon the findings in the technical staff report, with the revision specifically to finding 13, which needs to be modified, that being on page 21, as explained further by Ms. Gupta in her testimony, I move for the approval of preliminary plan 4-21039, along with staff's conditions as modified by applicant's exhibit number 1, further to add condition number 3C from the City of College Park's exhibit, subject to an analysis by staff. And I move further for the approval that we adopt as findings of staff as modified. I further move for the approval of the variation to section 24-122A based upon the findings of the technical staff report as set forth on pages 15 through 18.
Okay, we have a motion. And is there a second? Motion and
Yeah.
second. Any discussion on the motion? I will call the roll. Thank you, Commissioner Giraldo. Commissioner Giraldo.
I vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Good eye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it, 3-0. Thanks, everybody, for your participation in this matter.
Okay.
So move on to our next item, which is item number 5. Item number 5 is a detailed site plan DSP 21033 Metropolitan East at Conterra Town Center. Mr. Ingles is the attorney. Mr. Bishop is the will be providing the staff report on this. We have some proponents lined up to speak potentially. There's no opposition on this that has signed up, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Bishop for a staff report.
Mr. Chairman, prior to Mr. Bishop getting on here, I wanted to take a quick moment, if you don't mind. Again, for the record, James Hunt with the Development Review Division. I wanted to take an opportunity to thank Jill Kosak, who is the acting urban design planning supervisor. She's been doing that for quite some time. I wanted to alert the board and let them know that, after an extensive search that has taken place, we have now, we do now have a new planning supervisor for the urban design section. Her name is Miss Ann Fothergill. But before I go into Ms. Fothergill, I wanted to really thank Jill Kosak for all her hard work. She has, done a phenomenal job over the past definitely year and so working on a lot of these urban design cases, keeping everything on board, not letting anything lax by any means. She's again, I just cannot thank her enough. The department cannot thank her enough for all the hard work she's done. So thank you, Ms. Kosak, for everything. Also, I wanted to, again, like I said, introduce Ms. Fothergill. She comes to us, Ms. Fothergill, from the DC Office of Planning, I believe, working on a lot of their development review cases there with the, Department of General Services in the District of Columbia. Prior to that, she was working with the commission, everyone. She worked with the Montgomery County Planning as a planner coordinator at the time. That was the title. But since then, she has moved on to work for the district in a planning capacity. She's been doing this for over 20 years. So we thank her. She also has a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in planning from the University of New Orleans. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Ms. Ann Fothergill to the planning department and also introducing her to the planning commission. Thank you.
Thank you, and let me add our thanks. Commissioners, you may have words to add as well from Ms. Kosak and all the work that she has done. Really appreciate all the professionalism and all the effort for all these years. And I do want to say that I have some experience working with Ms. Fothergill in DC, and it is very good to see you again, and glad you're on board and glad you're part of the broadly defined Prince George's team. It's good to see you again. Any else, commissioners? Thank you.
Well, to Ms. Kosak, I'm glad we don't have to vote on whether or not she can leave. So, but I do wish her well. I did have a chance to speak with her recently, but she has really been a terrific asset to this whole planning board and to the county. So we will miss her tremendously, and I wish her well in whatever she plans to do in the future.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Bailey, she's not leaving the planning department.
No.
She's leaving
Oh, she's not?
No.
She's staying with us. We're making sure of that.
Great.
She's just not going to be the supervisor of the urban design.
Oh, that's different. Okay.
She just now gets to take a big breath. And
Okay.
relax.
Very different then. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would like to add my comments with respect to Ms. Kosak. She's always most professional, and I know there have been more than one instance where she came in when there was some issues, and she was able to clarify it, and more importantly, in lay language. So thank you, Ms. Kozak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
And obviously, welcome to New Edition.
Yeah, welcome.
So with that, and thank you, Mr. Hunt, for that, we will turn it over to Mr. Bishop. And again, we are on DSP 21033 Metropolitan East at Conterra Town Center. And Mr. Bishop for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board, for the record, I am Andrew Bishop with the Urban Design Section. This is item 5 for Metropolitan East at Conterra Town Center. We requesting approval to construct 219 single-family attached dwelling units in the overall mixed-use development known as Conterra Town Center. The subject application has been reviewed and evaluated in accordance with the prior zoning ordinance. Before I get started, please note that the applicant has submitted revised conditions prior to the new deadline, and staff has provided a supporting exhibit for this application. These are labeled as applicant's Exhibit 1 and staff's Exhibit 1 in your backup. Slide 2, please. The property is in northern Prince George's County and Planning Area 60, Council District 1. Slide 3, please. This DSP is part of the larger Conterra Town Center site, which includes the ultimate development of 4,500 dwelling units and 5 million square feet of commercial, retail, office, and hotel uses. Conterra's Town Center is located east of the Capitol Beltway and north of Maryland 200. The specific area of this DSP is directly east of the downtown core area and Conterra Boulevard. The site is in the northeast and southeast quadrants of the intersection of Conterra Boulevard and Fashion Place. Slide 4, please. The site and surrounding properties are in the TAC core zone and what was previously in the MXT zone, as seen in the images on the screen. Slide 5, please. The site is not in an overlay zone. Slide 6, please. The aerial image shown here shows that the site has been mass graded and includes roads which abut the site. Slide 7, please. The existing site outlined in purple is it slopes to the south and west. No new impacts to regulated environmental features are proposed with this application, which have not been previously approved. Slide 8, please. The collector Fashion Place is shown in green, and the future collector Conterra Boulevard East is shown here in blue. Slide 9, please. This is a bird's eye view of the site looking northwest, showing the existing site. Slide 10, please. This exhibit was submitted by the applicant and shows the relationship of this development, shown in pink, to the downtown core area of the town center, which is shown in blue, and was the subject of DSP 08011. Slide 11, please. A rendering was submitted by the applicant showing the development proposed in this application. The layout submitted with this application includes units that are 16 feet wide and require a variance from section 27548H, which requires buildings to be 18 feet wide. A variance may only be granted when the planning board finds that an application meets specific criteria. This criteria is discussed in detail on pages 16 through 19 of the staff report. Staff was unable to find that applicant's request met the requirements of criteria 2 and 3 and recommends disapproval of the variance to allow 16-foot wide units. Slide 12, please. The next two slides include the layout approved with the preliminary plan of subdivision. This slide shows 3 points of access to the property north of the site. Slide 13, please. The applicant is proposing to remove condition 1F, requiring that these connections be made, and staff is in agreement. It is unclear how the property north of the subject site will develop in the future, and the adequacy and connectivity to that site will be evaluated when that area is developed. Slide 14, please. This is a site plan of the highly visible units proposed with this application and are shaded here in orange. A condition related to the minimum number of architectural features is recommended and is included as condition 1H in the staff report. Slide 15, please. The next 2 slides include exhibits related to fire access and the proposed turning radius for emergency vehicles. Slide 16, please. Staff finds the site access and turning radius are adequate. Slide 17, please. The next 11 slides show elevations for the 7 different townhome models available from Caruso Homes. The townhomes include architectural elements such as gabled roof, brick details, metal roofs, and covered entries. Rear decks and rooftop patios are shown as standard on each unit, except those units which include rear yard and detached garages. The elevations shown here are of the Boulevard model. Slide 18, please. Side elevations of the Boulevard model are shown here and feature options such as a bonus room and bay windows. Slide 19, please. Standard decks are shown here on the rear elevations of this unit, which are cantilevered over the 2-car garage. Slide 20, please. These elevations show the front facade of the park model, which offers a variety of materials, including cement siding, brick, and architectural accents, such as dormers, bay windows, and metal roofs. Slide 21, please. These are the side elevations of the park model. Slide 22, please. Rear elevations are shown here and include an optional roof deck at the rear of the unit. Slide 23, please. The last unit is the edge model, and these elevations show a brick knee wall that in the fronts of these units to help define the front yards. Slide 24, please. The edge model proposes a detached garage and offers a rear yard. A brick wall is used on the end units to accent the facade and screen the backyards. Slide 25, please. This slide shows the different building materials which are offered for this model to provide variety. The elevation shown here uses horizontal siding. Slide 26, please. This is the rear elevation of the edge model. Slide 27, please. Lastly, this is the elevation of the detached garage, which is accessed from private alleys at the rear of the units. Slide 28, please. This exhibit is of the TCB2 and shows the overall development. The TCB2 proposes a combination of on-site and off-site preservation and is consistent with the previous TCP applications. The TCB2 submitted with this DSP is recommended for approval subject to technical revisions, which have been included in the staff report. Slide 29, please. The applicant has reviewed the technical staff report and is requesting revisions to conditions which have been included in your backup. Staff has reviewed the revised condition language and is in agreement with condition 1F and 2A, but is not in agreement with the deletion of condition 1D. The urban design section is pleased to recommend the planning board adopt the findings of this report and approve detailed site plan DSP 21033 and type 2 tree conservation plan TCP 206-5-08-03 for Metropolitan Terra Town Center and disapprove the variance to allow 16-foot wide townhouse buildings subject to the conditions in the report and as amended by the applicant's revised conditions. Please let me know if the board has any questions. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Commissioners, questions for staff before we hear from the applicant?
Just one, I had one question. Which provision of the applicant's exhibit number 1 that you do not approve?
Staff doesn't agree with condition 1T,
Okay.
which is requesting that a stormwater concept plan be submitted at the time of certification.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions for staff?
No questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bailey. I'll turn to you, Mr. Dingles.
Morning. Good morning, planning board members.
We've got a bit of an echo.
Well, I've been unable to get in without using the phone. Let's see.
Turn the speaker off on your computer and just use the phone.
Morning, members. Can you hear me well?
We can. We can
Okay.
see you. And
So first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Bishop for his review and indicate that we agree predominantly with the analysis and the review he just provided to you. I do have a few members of our team present, but we're all essentially in concurrence. I would note that with regard to condition 1T, in which there's still disagreement by the applicant and staff, our primary reason was the result of an email that we did have DPI submit to Mr. Bishop. In that email, Ms. Giles, who's a deputy director with DPI, did explain that DPI does not restamp the concept plan every time it issues a concept approval letter. They have, for this particular case, decided that the concept that we've already turned in is sufficient, notwithstanding the changes that DPI has subsequently approved. The way the condition is written, it's essentially indicating that we will never be able to get a certified plan if DPI's policy, which is not to restamp the concept approval, it is not somehow modified to be consistent with what staff is requesting. We're trying not to get ourselves caught in the middle of what seems to be a difference of opinion between the two agencies. And again, DPI has decided for purposes of its own policy, it's not going to restamp that approval. Therefore, we ask that that condition be deleted. The email that did come to Mr. Bishop did indicate that that concept plan was approved. It just wasn't going to be restamped. With that, other than I'd like to, Mr. Bishop did call me with some information yesterday. And I do want to apologize. I was very quick with him. I happened to be with Mrs. Gingles celebrating an anniversary, and she was pressing me not to take any phone calls. So my apologies, but I do appreciate you contacting me with that information. So with that, we would ask that the board consider including our request for the deletion of 1T based on that information that we've provided about the policy of DPI and further adopt the recommendation of staff. I just want to note one thing, one additional item with regard to the variance. And while we didn't agree with the staff's findings on there, we're prepared to move forward as is. The main reason that we were requesting that variance was some master plan language as well as prior language in the conceptual site plan that asked that we provide a fair amount of diversity among the residential product that was going to be there. Part of that diversity was to implement the type of units that we've seen in other areas of the county. They were very accepted and purchased by purchasers of different means in the Hyattsville project, where they did do 16-foot wide townhouses. We thought these would be a good addition and would also allow us to go to the extreme with some 20-foot wide townhouses in the project. That notwithstanding, we're prepared to do the modifications with regard to this plan, but that was the primary reason we were filing that variance, in order to have that diversity that was sort of designated for this project in the prior master plan and other approvals associated with Contara Town Center. That's it for me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gingles. Questions for Mr. Gingles from fellow commissioners?
The only question I have for Mr. Gingles is, so with regards to 1T, the applicant is willing and will follow the official signed and sealed stormwater management plan, right?
So what DPI has indicated is the plan that we have previously provided is the official signed and sealed plan, that they don't restamp a plan as a result of some amendments we did. And the concern is that the lead-in of condition 1 is prior to certification. So if we're trying to get our plan certified and DPI is sticking with its position and there's no relief, and that staff is not letting us get our plan certified, we have an applicant that's caught in the middle of to some extent, a policy dispute between two agencies.
Okay, but DPI did approve your revised plans. They're just not.
Correct, and it did notify
Okay.
staff of that. And Mr. Bishop, I think, can confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
I can confirm that. We have a approved letter for the concept plan, but we don't have the approved plan. The backup, which are the email that Mr. Gingles references, staff exhibit 1, includes that email from Mrs. Giles.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Commissioner Geraldo, any other questions?
No, I mean, I guess I'd like to hear from Mr. Warner as to the necessity of it being stamped.
And I'd like to hear from Mr. Hunt on this as well, because have we run into this before? Is there some kind of policy coordination that we need? Is there something unique about this case that this is coming before us in this way? I'm just curious about it as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is Tom Burke from the Environmental Planning Section. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, so we have the letter from Ms. Giles indicating that a new plan will not be issued. All we're asking for is something from DPI directly, and I don't believe that I think we can acquiesce on that condition, provided that we can get something from DPI stating that that approved plan is the appropriate plan for us to move forward.
I appreciate that. I mean, this is, by definition, what we're doing is watching sausage being made often. But this one is a little bit odd, where our problem what I'm hearing is that you're not getting what you need from another agency, which puts, I have to agree with Mr. Giggles, it puts them in an awkward position because it's not like they're doing anything wrong. They're just caught in the middle. So I certainly don't, that doesn't feel fair. So I appreciate you all being flexible on that, even with your recommendation. And then we can work with, you can work with what you need to do to get what you need from DPI.
Absolutely, and then we'll sort this out so that this isn't an issue in the future. This isn't something that's come up before, is to my knowledge anyway. So we'll make sure that this is resolved after this hearing.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Bailey, any questions for Mr. Giggles?
No questions.
So there's no questions for Mr. Giggles. I just want to make sure that on the 16, I actually have a question for our team around the 16-foot townhome and the require, because my orientation is more that diversity is a good thing. And again, I have some firsthand knowledge of the townhome developments in the Arts District High School that were narrow townhomes, and one of the advantages to having a broader range of size of townhomes is that it brings some economic diversity to it as well, so they can be more affordable products. So I'm inclined to follow staff's recommendations on this, but I wouldn't mind, Mr. Hunt, Mr. Bishop, just hearing a little bit more around why this is such a hard and fast rule.
Mr. Chairman, if I just may, before they respond, I do think this is the result of it being a regulation as opposed to a design guideline.
I see.
And I have consistently said that I think there are too many things that are regulations, which in this instance then necessitated a variance and essentially is a property-based approval. And we did work with staff, and we tried to provide as much justification about why the property should be entitled to the variance. But the issue is more the result that that's something that's now in your regulations that probably should be modified, given that there are designs out there and 16-foot is becoming more widely used. But I would note that staff did try to work with this, and it is more related to the fact that as opposed to them not wanting to do it, it was in the regulations for which the variance was requested. We provided as much justification as we could. They ultimately could not concur with that justification because enough of it wasn't, in their view, property based.
That's helpful backup, and that's good enough. And it may be a longer conversation, but not a longer conversation related to this case. So that's it. So are there additional questions that we have for Mr. Giggles? Any other questions for staff, commissioners? If not, we can close this hearing. And what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, based upon staff's evaluation and the analysis by the urban design staff, I move that the planning board adopt the findings of the report and approve detailed site plan DSP 21033 and type 2 tree conservation plan TCP 2-065-8-03, as well as adopt the approval of the conditions of staff as modified by applicant's exhibit number 1, and that we disapprove the variance to allow 16-foot wide townhouses.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Call the roll. Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 3-0. Thank you, everybody, for your time on this case. Appreciate it. Giggles, are you speaking to us? Giggles, we can't hear you. Nah, I think he's moved on from us on something else. Yeah, so let's go on to item 7. Commissioners, do you need a quick break?
No, not at this time, I don't.
Oh, good. Okay, commission, item 7, Pacific Design Plan SDP 1603-02, National Capital Business Park. The attorney for the applicant is Dan Lynch. Staff reviewer, staff presentation will be made Mr. Zhang. We have some opponents for this as well who will be speaking, and I will turn it over to Mr. Zhang for the staff presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. For the record, this is Henry Zhang with Urban Design Section. Item 7 in front of you is a specific design plan, basically a revision to previously approved SDP for a 3.4 million square feet of warehouse distribution facility with associated parking and truck trailer and loading areas in the Collington Center. Per section 27-1703D of the zoning ordinance, this case is reviewed under the prior zoning ordinance. There is a companion case here, is item 8 is a draft resolution for this case. We receive a total of 13 exhibits, of which 2 are exhibits from the applicant and 11 exhibits from the citizen opposition party. Next slide, please. This site is in planning area 74A, Council District 4. Next slide, please. Specifically, you see here outlined in red. This site is in the middle of a larger property, which was in front of planning board several times in the past year or so. This site, the larger site, is located on the north side of Leland Road, approximately 3,178 feet west of its intersection with US 301. On the right-hand side of this exhibit, those buildings basically are in the Collington Center. This is at the very end of the Collington Center. Next slide, please. This site is in the new zoning LCD, is the Legacy Comprehensive Design Zone. Next slide, please. Yes, next slide, please. This is the prior zoning map. Basically, it's in one of the 9 prior comprehensive design zone. This is the RS, is the residential suburban density zone. Next slide, please. Actually, next 2 slides, please. Those are the exhibit shows there's no overlay zone on this property. Yes, next slide, please. This is the aerial map, shows the site basically is vacant and wooded. On the right-hand side, those are the buildings in the existing Collington Center. Next slide, please. This site map shows there are a lot of regulated environmental features on this site. But however, this SDP is within the previously approved limit of disturbance under SDP-1603-01, which is an infrastructure specific design plan for the entire National Capital Business Park. Next slide, please. The subject property is outlined in blue here, and Leland Road is a major collector roadway. Next slide, please. This is the overall facing plan for the National Capital Business Park. Different color representing future faces, but the green here, which include 3 parcels, is basically those parcels under the subject SDP. Next slide, please. This is the specific design plan. This site has a very long approval history, which dated back to the 1990s. The planning board recently, as I mentioned previously, approved 2 comprehensive design plans and then 2 preliminary plan of subdivision for the development up to 5.5 million square feet of the employment and the institutional uses, which generally are permitted in the EIA, which also is one of the old comprehensive design zone without any residential component. This specific design plan is the first full-scale SDP within this larger development. The access to this site will be through Queens Court, which is the extension of Princess George's Boulevard, further east from the Collington Center. You see here, the site will be accessed through 3 driveway, from Queens Court, and then there's 1 big building footprint, in a footprint of approximately 649,000 square feet. It's 1 big building in the middle of the site, surrounded on the 4 side, basically to the southern portion. That's a big parking lot, approximately 1,700-ish parking spaces, and then on the northern and then also east side, basically are those major truck trailers and loading spaces. Next slide, please. There are multiple directional signage located throughout this site, and also some building mounted signage also proposed. But this is the 1 monumental sign, which will be located at one of the main entrances to the site. This is the detail of that monumental sign. Next slide, please. Actually, the next 4 slides basically will be showing the perspective of proposed building. Once again, it's 1 large building. And then we have also provided a lot of information on page 7 of the staff report, basically tell what kind of green building techniques will be used. So next 4 slides, basically slides 14 to 17, will be the perspective of the building. Basically, this building is finished with 5 types of metal panels, and also in combination with 5 types of concrete panel. And then can you please just go to next slides and keep going? And it is designed a very balanced composition. The elevation are proportionally and visually divided into small portion modules to minimize the horizontal expenses to the extent practical through those tower elements you see here, and also projections and also the color patterns. Next slide, please. Staff is very happy with the building proposed for this site. And this SDP conforms to previously approved basic plans, comprehensive design plans, and the preliminary plan of subdivision. This SDP also has been reviewed for conformance with landscape manual, tree canopy coverage ordinance, woodland wildlife habitat conservation ordinance. The required finding for the planning board to approve the SDP, as stated in section 27.528, has been fully satisfied. Staff report on page 10 to 12 basically provide a detailed discussion. I noticed that in the opposition, they stated the requirement for the 528 has not been satisfied, but I don't believe they have any reason to say that. So on page 10 to 12, there's a discussion on how each criteria has been satisfied. No agency opposed to the approval of this SDP. However, citizen opposition has been received during the review process. The applicant proposed 4 revisions to the 4 sub-condition of condition number 1. I think staff worked with the applicant very hard, and then we agree with all the proposed revision. But the condition 1P will be, instead of a complete deletion, a new language will be introduced. In conclusion, the urban design section recommends that the planning board approve this SDP-1603-02, including type 2 tree conservation plan TCP2-026-2021-02 for National Business Park with 3 conditions, as stated on page 25 to 28 of the staff report. This concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Commissioners, questions for staff?
Just one quick question regarding the conditions. Did I understand, Mr. Zhang, that all conditions stand except there is a new condition for condition P?
Yes, ma'am. Instead of a complete deletion of the, condition 1P, where some brief new language will be introduced. Thank you.
And that
the applicant will be talking about that condition.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Giraldo.
Yeah, just following up on that. So, Mr. Zhang, have you and the applicant agreed to the new language that's going to be read to replace 1P?
Yes, sir. I think Mr. Lynch will be here to talk about the new language.
And you know what it says?
Yes, we agreed upon. Thank you, sir.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Giraldo.
Any other questions for staff? If not, I will turn it over to the applicant, Mr. Lynch. Take it away.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, Dan Lynch with the law firm of McNamee Hosey, here on behalf of the applicant, AMS 2022 BTS Upper Marlboro, Maryland, LLC. With me here today is representatives of the applicant, Mr. Cody Garrison and Dan Tomenko. We also have with us here today Mike Lenhart, who's traffic engineer on the project. They will not be presenting today, but are here to answer any questions this board may have. Also joining us online is the Master Developer's Attorney, Rob Antonetti. He's also here representing developers' interest, but also here to answer any questions you may have resulting from this presentation. Before I begin, I'd like to just thank Mr. Zhang. We've worked very hard on bringing this application to the board, and up till yesterday, we're working very hard on presenting the board with conditions that both the development review staff as well as the applicant agreed to. I'd also like to thank Mr. Hunt. As usual, Mr. Hunt worked very closely with us in keeping this application on track and on time. And then finally, I can't help but thank Mr. Antonetti. I mean, him and his team have done a lot of work that preceded this, including but not limited to the basic plan amendment, comprehensive design plan amendment, and the preliminary plan, as well as the specific design plan for infrastructure. They've worked very hard, and as a result of this hard work, we're able to present with you the application which is before you today. As Mr. Zhang indicated, we are here today on the first SDP in this development that is actually proposing a building. And that building is 3,428,985 square feet in size. It's 5 stories. It's a 5-story distribution facility that is going to be located within the National Capital Business Park. This facility will occupy approximately 90.11 acres of the 422 acres that makes up National Capital Business Park. Now, as you know, and as Mr. Zhang indicated during his presentation, National Capital Business Park is located just to the west of the Collington Business Center, and is also located along Leland Road. I will emphasize, as I'm sure this has come up during the opposition's testimony, that we are not proposing any access from National Capital Business Park to Leland Road. All access will be through Queen Anne's Court, which comes through Collington Center. Again, this is a very large building. It's 3,428,985 square feet in size, and it's 93 feet tall. A lot of thought, number one, was put into the architecture, which Mr. Zhang took you through. We proposed a mix of building materials, a mix of colors, and also proposed many varying architectural features to create some type of visual interest, and also to break up the overall bulk of that building. I think if you look at that architecture, I think we have reached our goal of breaking up that bulk so that you're not merely looking at just one straight metal building side. You're looking at a building where the applicant has put a lot of thought into the architecture and how it's going to present to folks coming to this site. The other trick or key to this entire development was making sure that because we're presenting a building that is 93 feet tall, that it does not visually impact the surrounding properties. That being said, both my client as well as the master developer found the site within National Capital Business Park where we could utilize both distance and the proposed woodland conservation areas to help screen this building from the adjoining properties. And again, I believe we accomplished that. This site is located to the very north of the development envelope for National Capital Business Park. And if I could ask staff bring up applicant's exhibit, which is a sightline exhibit.
Give us a moment here, Mr. Woods. We're trying to find it in this. Is it one of these that you're looking for?
Page 3 in the backup. Is this page 3? Page 4. Go to page 4. I'm sorry. Those applicant conditions. There you go. If you look at the first page of our exhibit, you'll see the building in white. Again, you can tell that based upon it, it's located to the very north of the development envelope. And you can see in this exhibit, the areas in green, which is the existing trees, and those are areas of woodland conservation. So we located this building in an area of the site that was the furthest away from Leland Road, and it's kind of surrounded by woodland conservation areas. If you go to the next page of that exhibit. Now this view on the second page of the exhibit is a camera view taken from Leland Road. At this area of Leland Road, most of the trees that all the trees that you're looking at are going to be preserved, and they'll actually be much denser than actually appears on this exhibit. But you can tell that you can see, if anything, just the very, very top of this building. If you could scroll up a little bit on that, yeah. Okay, thank you. And one of the reasons being is that this building is going to be located 3,426 feet from Leland Road. That's 2/3 of a mile. So, even from the winter, when the trees and leaves are off the trees, just given the distance from Leland Road, this building will be barely visible. So I think the key of trying to make sure that this building doesn't impact from a visual standpoint the surrounding properties is very important. And I think that my client and the master developer were successful in finding a location on the site where we could accomplish that, and accomplish that through both distance and through utilizing the existing woodland conservation area. So again, even though this building is 93 feet in height, we believe that there'll be little, if any, visual impact on the surrounding properties. And what's not noted in this exhibit is that you're only looking at this from Leland Road. What's important is to also note that this building be located over 2,400 feet from the closest homes, okay, to the west, and over 5,000 feet from the proposed homes that would be built in the Carrington subdivision, which is located to the north. So again, we're proposing a very large building, but I think it's my client's done a very, very good job of locating this on the site where it will not have a visual impact to surrounding properties. Now, as Mr. Zhang indicated during his presentation, we're here on a specific design plan. And for this board to approve this specific design plan, it must make findings set forth in section 27.528 of the zoning ordinance. And we believe that this specific design plan does comply with those requirements. The first thing we'd like to state is that because this specific design plan does conform, as indicated by Mr. Zhang, to CDP 0505-1, which was approved by the planning board on April 29, 2021, as well as the amendment to that CDP 050502, which was approved by the planning board on May 5th of this year. In addition, this CDP complies with sections 4.2, 4.3, and 4.9 of the landscape manual. And I'd also ask this board to take note of specific design plan SDP 160301, which was the specific design plan for infrastructure that was approved this year. And that specific design plan notes that this entire site will comply with 4.6 and 4.7 of the landscape manual. And I think that's important because when the CDP was presented to the board this year, you heard testimony from a Ms. Ruth Grover talking about the impact of the overall site on Leland Road and how she found that the site didn't comply with the landscape manual requirements. But again, I think you just merely need to refer to that SDP for infrastructure and a table which specifically states that we comply with 4.6 and 4.7. And I'll also note that based upon the exhibit I presented to you today, that not only will we be complying with 4.6, but we'll be exceeding in many areas the 4.6 requirements. So we'll be preserving the views from that scenic historic road, and that is Leland Road. Now, the next point is that we believe that this site will be served by adequate public facilities within a reasonable time. This board made a determination on June 2nd of 2022 in its review and approval of preliminary plan 4-21056 that there would be public facilities available to this site within a reasonable period of time. With specific regard to the transportation facilities, this board placed a condition of approval on that preliminary plan, and that condition of approval placed a 5.5 million square foot square foot trip cap on this development. We are proposing, again, 3.5 million square feet, which falls well within that transportation condition. The SDP also conforms to the site development concept plan, but I should note that we also have filed with DPI an amendment to that plan, and the purpose of that amendment is to substitute the use of an underground detention facility for a stormwater management pond. And as a result of that, we'll be creating some additional PMA impacts, but I'll address those further as in my later comments. This development also conforms to a type 2 tree conservation plan. And then finally, okay, we are preserving the regulated minor features on this site to the fullest extent possible. As you heard on prior testimony, we are not proposing any additional impacts, although I will correct that statement slightly. Because we are proposing to increase the square footage on the site by going vertical as opposed to horizontal, we're able to kind of maintain the proposed limits of disturbance of the overall development. Okay, but because we are proposing to add a stormwater management pond as opposed to using an underground detention facility, we will be creating some additional impacts. And as a result of that, we filed a request with staff. And if I can just explain what is going on, as part of the grading permit, the master developer is proposing to install a sediment control pond that would be located kind of to the northwest of our building. When our engineers took a look at that, they determined that they were able to convert that sediment control pond to a storm management pond, but in order to convert it, they'd have to add an outfall. And it's the addition of that outfall that will cause additional impacts to the PMA. But because those impacts are a result of infrastructure in the stormwater management facility, staff feels that those impacts are acceptable. Now, there's one other impact that is before you today. It is not an impact that is proposed within the boundaries of this SDP, but it is shown on the Type 2 tree conservation plan. And it is an impact being proposed by the master developer. That impact is the PMA and as a result of the construction of Queen Anne Court within the PMA. Again, that's not within the boundaries of this SDP, but because it is shown on the Type 2 tree conservation plan, and because this case was coming to a public hearing, all the parties agreed that this SDP would be the most appropriate vehicle to put this impact in front of the board and at a public hearing for your consideration. Again, staff is supporting that additional impact. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that this application meets the requirements of Section 27.528 of the zoning ordinance, and we request this board's support and approval, subject to the conditions and the revisions I can present to you now. And the exhibit that I presented asked for modifications and deletion of 2 of the conditions and then the addition of 1 more condition. After consultation with staff yesterday, we've agreed to a modification. Excuse me 1 second. To condition P. And the modified language for condition P will read as follows. Provide bikeway guide signs, parentheses, D11-1/bike route, and D1-1, comma, D1-2, comma, and D1-3 destination plates. In R4-11, bicycles may use full lane, close parentheses, in association with bicycle lanes on this site. This was a language that was proffered by both Mr. Capers and Mr. Zhang. We agree with the revised language to P, and with that, I think we are in complete concurrence with staff's recommendation as revised with this condition. And again, with that, that is applicant's presentation. I have, more than willing to answer any questions this board has. And again, I have with me other representatives of the applicant who also have to answer any questions this board has. And again, we'll also be here to address any questions you have after you hear testimony from the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Lynch?
I'd like to go back to the slide where we saw the trees, I think on Leland. I don't know if that was the one. Could we go back there? I'm trying to get a sense of this location. Okay, that's Leland. A view from Leland Road?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where is there a view from 301?
No, I mean, we don't have a view from 301 because this will not be visible from 301. We're quite a distance. You have between us and 301 the Collington Corporate Center. So in our estimation, this won't be visible at all from US 301.
But that was what I was looking for to see if it would be. Okay, thank you for that.
And one additional clarification, Mr. Bailey, we also, you may remember that before you came an SDP for the Target's conversion of the former Safeway site. That's also fairly, 1 million square foot building on that site. That will also create the distance, and also, you can't even see that building from 301. So if you can't see that building from 301, you will not be able to see this building from 301.
Okay, I wanted to check that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Geraldo, any questions?
Yeah, I have two. With regards to looking at the slide that's being shown right now, is that the existing tree coverage or is that projected?
That's the existing. If you look at the first page of this exhibit, you'll see where this is taken from. This is taken from an area of Leland Road where they're proposing tree conservation, woodland conservation. So, there will be some work done on Leland Road as part of the underlying National Capital Business Park. They're doing some improvements on Leland Road. But again, you'll see that there's a significant amount of trees that will remain between our building and Leland Road. And you also note that from that perspective, you also will pick up, if at such time that there's a building placed on that parcel that is between us and Leland Road, that building will also, kind of obscure your view of this building. But again, even that building, I think for the most part, unless they're proposing, a building of significant height, will be significantly screened from Leland Road.
It does seem to be screened pretty well. Have you guys given any consideration to putting a green roof on that, given the expanse?
We have submitted to staff the green building techniques which we used in the construction of this building. Fortunately, it does not include a green roof.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, Mr. Lynch. When you were talking about, I think you were discussing how this is in conformance with the approved Type 2 tree conservation plan, and you were describing something about how you felt like this was I'm kind of half catching it. There was an issue that you were bringing up that you felt like, and staff agreed that this was the appropriate time and place to bring it up, even though normally it's not something that would be addressed at the specific design plan stage. Can you go over that again and help me understand? You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so there are two additional PMA impacts which are before you today. There's a PMA impact that's a direct result of the stormwater management facility that we're installing, and again, that's in lieu of an underground detention facility. And again, that doing surface stormwater is deep pipelines that preferable. So from their standpoint, from staff standpoint, that's preferable means of controlling stormwater. But in addition to that, Queen Anne Court, which will be serving this development as well as the other buildings that will be located to the south of this, there will be some additional PMA impact as a result of the installation of Queen Anne Court at that location. Okay, and again, because the impacts are associated with infrastructure, staff felt that those impacts are appropriate.
Appropriate for us to hear it at this specific design plan stage rather than at a later stage.
Well, they wanted, because of those, they want those impacts be heard by this board as part of this specific design plan, as opposed to as a later stage. So again, since we had this design plan coming before you, the public hearing, we agreed with staff that this would be appropriate vehicle to get those impacts in front of this board for determination as part of this determination on the underlying SDP for this bill.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And maybe this is a question for staff or Mr. Warner, because I mean, we are sticklers for making sure that what is before us, and we'll even when we hear from the opponents, I'll be reiterating that we're focusing on what is before us, and we're not addressing other issues that are considered at later stages. So I'm a little bit confused as to why we're bringing something up that normally might not be taken up at this stage, if I'm understanding this correctly. So maybe Mr. Warner or Mr. Hunt, you have if I can sort of take it out of order, that you have a response to that or a thought about that, or am I making too much of this issue?
David Warner, Principal Counsel. The first thing I would suggest is that we allow Tom Burke, if he is on, to give staff's the staff view on why addressing this in the TCP2 was appropriate at this time. If he's available, I defer to him first.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I apologize. Good morning still, I guess, Mr. Chair and members of the planning board. For the record, this is Tom Burke with the supervisor of the environmental planning section. So staff evaluated, we were evaluating all of the impacts of the site. And although this SDP is for a specific portion of the site, the TCP2 does cover the entire property. And we felt that as a fair representation of the entire property and the development moving forward, that this piece should be included. This impact, excuse me, should be included as part of this SDP.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That is clear. Thank you.
I would just add that I agree with that interpretation from a legal perspective as well. You've got an impact there on the eastern side of the property that is really going to address different projects, that roadway on the east end. So bringing it up as part of this project is appropriate.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Mr. Lynch, we're still on your, anything else on that you want to add?
No, I agree. I mean, again, as part of this, you're approving the type 2 tree conservation plan, and that is an impact shown on that plan, so it is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions for the applicant? If not, I will turn to other speakers, and we have two folks listed as opponents. We have Ms. Grover and we have Ms. Votel. Ms. Votel, I see you on the line. I don't see Ms. Grover. Will she be, do you know if she'll be speaking as well?
Yes, she will. This is Alex Votel on behalf of citizen opponents or protestants. She, I believe, is on the line. Her camera is not visible. But she will be going after I go.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I want to, Ms. Grover, good to see you. Want to manage the time on this. How much time do you feel you need to make your presentation?
Respectfully, Chairman, this is a complicated issue and we would request 45 minutes. I think that's roughly how long staff and applicant took. So I feel like that's pretty even. And we're representing approximately 8 different individuals who are not going to be speaking, so we can streamline it. So that's what we are requesting, 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'll give you, it is a complicated case. Let me give you some latitude on that. If the combination of the two of you can keep it to a half hour, and the most important thing is to keep it to what is before us. There are all sorts of issues, even looking in your written testimony, that are not relevant to what's before us. Obviously, use, for instance, is you know, it's a it's a factor when it comes to a specific design plan, but that's not one of the issues that's before us with a specific design plan. So as much as you can, focus on the issues that are before us with a specific design plan. And let me give you a combination of a half hour for the two of you.
I understand what you're saying, Chairman, and I represent my clients and I have to advocate or zealously advocate for them. So I will present reasons why I believe all of these issues are relevant, but I will take your desires in mind and make sure to focus my efforts on the things that you believe are the most relevant. So if that's okay, I'll get started, if that's all right with you.
Yep, and Kenneth, if you could set a clock for us, and we'll give you a half hour for the two of you. Thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Alex Vota, and I'm representing citizens who are opposed to SDP 160302. And I'll read those citizens' names and their addresses into the record. I also wanted to say that Ruth Grover, our expert in land planning, will be going after me. So for our clients, we have Ray and Kathy Crawford. If you need me to spell any of these names, please let me know. They also are all persons of record already. So
we have written versions of all this. So yeah, I would focus on what you need us to hear.
Okay, so you don't need, I'm just going to read the names in just for the record to be clear. So it's Ray and Kathy Crawford. They live at 1340 Crane Highway, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, 20774. They're located on the east side of 301 at the end of Queens Court. We have Arlancia and Antoine Williams, who live at 1905 Lake Forest Drive in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, 20774. They're at the south side of Leland Road in close proximity to the site. We have John Homick, who owns a commercial development within the Collington Center at 16,000 Trade Zone Avenue, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, 20774. We're also representing the Patuxent Riverkeeper, who's represented by Fred Tutman. They're located at 17412 Nottingham Road, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, 20772. And their interest is in the Collington branch, which is a tributary to the Patuxent River. We represent Dan Smith, 6019 Inwood Street, Cheverly, Maryland, 20785, who's interested in the tree issue. Bernice Miller Travis, it's hyphenated. She lives at 104 Jewett Place, Bowie, Maryland. Her property is to the north of the subject property and just south of Central Avenue on the west side of the railroad tracks. We have Charles Riley, 16770 Claggett Landing Road, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, 20774. And he resides on the east side of 301, just north of the Crawfords, who I mentioned before. And then finally, we have the UFCW Local 400, who's based in Largo. I am assuming that the board has already reviewed our summary of our arguments. So I will skip past that summary since it's already in the record, and I'll just get straight into the meat of our arguments. So this application is based on CB 22-2020, which is an illegal special law. I know the chairman has said that he doesn't believe this is necessarily a relevant consideration for this board, but we would argue that under the case law of Maryland Reclamation Associates versus Hartford County, 468 MD 339 2020, citizen protestants are obligated to raise this issue at this hearing, and it is relevant for the board's consideration because the validity of this application is based on the validity of that underlying law. And therefore, we would argue and we assert that this board has both the authority and the obligation to deny this application based on the fact that the underlying law is a special law. And if you want me to go into more detail about that case or this argument, I'm happy to do so at the end and happy to answer any questions regarding that. So on that basis alone, this board should deny this application. The second issue is that this board, based on the recommendations and conditions by the staff, to approve this application, the board would be approving it based on contingencies that the applicant would meet these criteria at a later date. I can go through examples of those contingencies or the conditions we believe are contingencies if you'd like, but to keep it simple, although that might be appropriate in other situations, in this specific one, section 27528A states that prior to approval, the planning board shall find that the applicant satisfies the criteria. This means that the application has to satisfy the criteria right now, based on what it is providing to the board at this moment. And citizen protestants are, assert that it does not, that there are several conditions which state that the applicant will meet these criteria at a later date. And we assert that that's not appropriate and not within the board's authority to do so. This is further supported by section 27.528E, which gives the planning board authority to approve the application, approve it with modifications, or disapprove it. And there's a process by which the board can put off approval for a later date so that the applicant can address any deficiencies in the application for up to 70 days, and the applicant can request an additional 45 days. So we're arguing that we assert that it's not appropriate for the planning board to approve this application based on an assumption that the required criteria will be met at a later date, and instead it would be more appropriate, and the only thing within the board's authority, to require the applicant to adjust their application so that it actually meets the criteria at this moment before it's approved. Third, we do not believe the applicant has demonstrated that it satisfies the required criteria. For sections 27.528A1 through 4, the staff is requiring conditions, which we would argue are contingencies, those conditions that would mean the applicant meets these criteria at a later date, not right now. So the applicant has not demonstrated that it meets conditions 27.528A1 through 4 at this moment. And again, if the board would like clarification on that, I'm happy to give it to you, but I want to keep it moving, get all my arguments in so that we save you all some time and you can ask the questions you find important at the end. Further, section 27.528A1 says that the applicant has to meet section 4.6C of the landscape manual. I know the applicant's representative mentioned that before. We assert that this application does not satisfy those criteria. If you would pull up the applicant's exhibit that he spoke about earlier with the view of the property. Thank you so much. So you can see where it says view number 1 on the left side of the screen. I would be curious what it looks like if you move that view to the right or to the east of the property, where you're viewing directly through the site up the entire area that's been removed from all of the trees. The applicant asserts that the tree buffering will prevent any view of the site from Leland Road, but has not presented any evidence that the people living in the houses directly across from the property, which you can see to the right of the little A on the screen, that they would not be able to directly view this property through the trees, particularly during the winter, because many of these trees have been removed already, and the buffer at this moment, as far as we understand, is only a handful of trees deep, maybe 2 or 3, and you can see directly through the entire site to the back of it. So we argue that they have not satisfied 4.6C, which requires the property to buffer view sheds from a special road like Leland Road. We also argue that under section 27.528A5, the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the PMA impacts that they were just discussing a few minutes ago are necessary. We argue they are not, and this is based on the environmental technical manual. The technical manual provides a 3-step process for this board to determine whether impacts are necessary or not necessary. So the first consideration you have to evaluate is whether the impacts can be avoided, and whether the impacts, whether the impacts can be avoided and whether they're necessary. The second is whether they have minimized any impact, and then the third consideration is whether, if they're necessary, they can't be avoided, and they have been minimized, whether they have taken the adequate mitigation methods to address the fact that they're permanently impacting wetlands. The environmental technical manual specifically lists things that are considered necessary under the technical manual and would allow PMA impacts, and stormwater outfalls like the one proposed here that would permanently impact wetlands are only necessary when they're placed at a point of least impact, and not necessary when they could be placed in another location based on a different design. Further, road crossings are not considered necessary when there's reasonable alternatives. Here we assert that this proposed project, the size of it could be reduced, its location within the property could be changed, and therefore you would not need the proposed stormwater outfall impact. Further, the applicant has not explained why it can't use Popes Creek Drive as the entrance to this property, which would avoid impacts to the wetlands completely. If they use that road instead of Queens Court, you would not need any impacts to the PMA for a wetland for a road crossing. So based on these reasons, the citizens assert that the applicant has not demonstrated it satisfies the required criteria at this moment. Fourth, the applicant has not demonstrated that it complies with several applicable conditions. Again, I won't go into the details of every single one, but I'll just list them for the record. We don't believe that this application applies with basic plan consideration 8, CDP consideration 1, CDP consideration 2, CDP 050502 condition 3, preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21056 condition 2, CDP 050502 condition 4, CDP 050502 condition 6, preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21056 condition 4, as well as preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21056 condition 7. Again, that was a lot of numbers. I'm sure it wasn't very clear. If the planning board has any questions specifically about those conditions I just mentioned, I'm happy to give more details at the end.
Why don't you, let me jump in on that real quick. When we get to the end, why don't you think of the 1 or 2 or 3 that you feel are the most egregious, so that we can digest that and perhaps hear from the applicant around that as well.
Absolutely, Chairman. I also want to address the point that neither the CDP or the preliminary plan have been certified. In fact, the district council is reviewing the CDP 050502 in September, and therefore the conditions applicable might change. So there's no way for this board to determine whether this application will comply with that CDP because it has not been certified yet. Which is another reason why we feel this application is a little too early, and it would be better for the board to wait for these issues to be resolved before making any final determination on this application. Fifth, this application is being reviewed under the prior zoning ordinance. Again, I know the chairman mentioned the use issue. We would just argue that the proposed use, a high cube fulfillment center warehouse, is not permitted under the prior zoning ordinance, and therefore this application should not be approved. We have submitted into the record a case that the Maryland Court of Appeals is considering in September about this specific issue, whether or not the prior zoning ordinance permitted this type of use at all on any property. And so all that information is in the record for this board to take into consideration as well. And based on that, we argue the planning board should disapprove of this application. As I explained before, in a different context, we believe the PMA impacts are not necessary, and that's why the applicant doesn't meet some of the review criteria, and also why the board should not approve of those impacts at this moment. Seventh, we believe the TCP2 is deficient. The Woodland Conservation Ordinance requires the applicant to exhaust on-site preservation methods before it's approved for off-site preservation methods. And we argue that the applicant has not demonstrated that it cannot meet its requirements on site, or that it has not demonstrated that it can meet more of its requirements on site before being approved for almost 25 acres of off-site preservation. In fact, on the staff report, page 19, the staff specifically identifies that the applicant could continue to look for opportunities to provide for additional areas of reforestation on the site. We believe that's just another example of the fact that it has not been thoroughly exhausted the methods for preserving on-site woodland preservation, and therefore the TCP2 is insufficient at this time. And then finally, we believe that SDP 160302 conflicts with the general plan as well as the 2006 area master plan. I know that the staff believes that the 2022 master plan is more appropriate, but we argue because this is based on the previous zoning, that it would be more appropriate to use the previous master plan, which tries to effectuate that zoning ordinance. And I wanted to address the fact that although compliance with this may not be a requirement in the criteria, it's always a consideration for this board to take into. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ruth, if that's okay, our expert, Ms. Grover, and I will come up with some of those examples that you asked about before.
Grover. You're on mute, Ms. Grover.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Ruth Grover, and I prepared this testimony as to the land planning issues in SDP 160302 for National Capital Business Park. With respect to comprehensive planning, I'd say that the subject project isn't in conformance with the basic tenet of comprehensive planning, which include that comprehensive plans express the goals and objectives for an area, and ordinances such as zoning and subdivision implement them by setting requirements which development should conform to. Here, the applicant has opted to have the project reviewed under the provisions of the old zoning ordinance. However, it was also reviewed under a new master plan approved in 2022. If a plan is to be implemented by the zoning ordinance, wouldn't it have been more appropriate to utilize the old master plan? The older plan called for residential use on the property, whereas the newer plan calls for industrial use on the subject property, which is what the applicant desires to build. The Comprehensive Planning Division has stated that master plan conformance is not necessary for SDPs. Why do they say this? Because master plan conformance is not a required finding for SDPs in section 27.528 of the zoning ordinance. I would ask why these plans are written if they're not to provide guidance for development in the various areas of the county. Does this mean also that we shouldn't look to guidance to the Plan Prince George's 2035, the overall planning document in the county? Of course we should. Additionally, we feel that conformance to the comprehensive planning documents in the earlier A-, 4- and CDP were not sufficiently found where required. That is part of why we are seeking District Council judicial review of those approvals. Further, comprehensive planning should be just that, overall in approach and even-handedly implemented, considering the county as a whole and multiplicity of projects and types of land use that are envisioned for all areas of the county. It's my opinion that in this case, the comprehensive planning process has been subverted to enable a certain use in a certain location where it's not supported by the comprehensive planning documents in place, nor the ordinances meant to implement them. Planning should come first and then the effort to implement those plans, not the other way around. The development review process should be consistently consider the comprehensive planning goals and objectives and not bend or modify requirements to serve individual interests or on a case-by-case basis. The subject project is not in conformance with Plan Prince George's 2035. Plan Prince George's 2035 indicates that this project is located in the established communities, which are existing residential and commercial areas served by public water and sewer outside the regional transit districts and local centers, which are most appropriate for context-sensitive infill and low to medium density development, where existing public services and infrastructure should be enhanced to ensure that the needs of existing residents are met. In the subject case, the applicant is proposing approximately a 3.5 million square foot high cube fulfillment center warehouse, which is high intensity land use and doesn't fit with this vision. Additionally, this new land use is undefined in the old zoning ordinance under which the applicant has chosen to proceed. As obvious in the PowerPoint offered by the staff for the project, there are many established communities in the vicinity of the subject site. The nature of the use is in question. Looking at the DAMS database that Park and Planning maintains for development review applications, the A-996803 applied for warehousing, distribution, light industrial, and manufacturing. CDP 050502 was solely for an increase in square footage, with the resolution referring to employment and institutional land uses. 4-21056 was approved for industrial uses, but condition 1B required a note be revised on the plans that refers to the project as High Cube Fulfillment Center Warehouse. What is responsible for these divergent descriptions of the same use? It's a desire to meet all the requirements for this project, regardless of if it's a square peg in a round hole. The notion that the subject project is warehousing and distribution, as described in the old zoning ordinance, is patently untrue. This issue should be resolved before the SDP is approved. The subject project doesn't conform to the 2006 approved master plan and sectional map amendment for Bowie and vicinity. It was incorrect. The 2022 approved Bowie, Mitchellville, and vicinity master plan was incorrectly applied. Though the applicant would prefer to proceed under the new 2022 approved Bowie Mitchellville master plan, which shows the site as industrial, I believe the 2006 plan should have been applied as it's more appropriate for use in tandem with the old zoning ordinance. As Alex mentioned, we find a problem with the extensive conditioning of the approvals, and especially where they impact the required findings. All the required findings should be met at the time that the project is approved. We are also concerned that the applicant didn't demonstrate that there were adequate public facilities, especially fire and transportation, at the time of preliminary plan of subdivision. We're also concerned that inadequate attention was paid to master and general plan conformance at the time of preliminary plan and CDP approval. Lastly, we are concerned that since this approval has been appealed to the court and is not in final form, it's impossible to evaluate the subject application's conformance with the preliminary plan of subdivision and other prior approvals. For all the foregoing reasons, the subject-specific design plan should be disapproved. It runs counter to the basic tenets of comprehensive planning. It's enabled by a illegal special law. It is not in conformance with the operative comprehensive planning documents and doesn't demonstrate conformance with the relevant provisions of the zoning and subdivision ordinances. Thank you for your time.
I was muted, I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Garber. Let me turn it back to you, Ms. Vota. You had some additional pieces, and then we'll turn to commissioners to see if there's questions for the
Yeah,
opponents.
absolutely. So before I start, I wanted to just nail down the difference in my mind between a contingency and a condition. So a condition would be, you meet the criteria, but maybe we need to add a little extra to make sure it makes sense in this location. Or for example, I can think of an example off the top of my head, but a contingency in my mind would be, you don't meet the criteria right now, but we will approve it based on the condition or contingency that you meet it at a later date. And so an example of that is the requirement 27528A2, which states that the development you have to find at this moment, the development will be adequately served within a reasonable period of time with existing or program public facilities. This is also a condition on the CDP, I believe. Let me find it. Yes, so CDP 050502 condition 4, based on that, states that the road improvements will be phased at the time of future specific design plan applications. As far as I know, based on condition of approval 1M, 1N, and 1O, the board would be approving this application based on the contingency that those two required findings would be met at a later date. That's what condition 1M, condition 1N, and condition 1O of approval state, is that the phasing plans, the fee schedule, and the truck turning plan will all be determined later, after approval. So we would argue that's an example of a contingency that's not permitted under the applicable criteria. Another example of that, just to be brief, is that the board is required to find that the plan as presented would be adequate for the drainage of surface water, so essentially the stormwater management. And there's similarly a requirement under, let me find it, I apologize. Preliminary plan of subdivision 4-21056, condition 4, states that this development will be in conformance with the approved stormwater management plan in any subsequent revisions. As applicant demonstrated already, there's a revision before DPI right now. So how can the planning board approve this at this moment without that being approved by DPI first? So it's just another example of why this is too early to consider this application, and the board should either push off a decision later until those inconsistencies and outstanding issues are determined, or deny the application and allow the applicant to reapply once those issues have been determined. And I have a few other examples, but for now, I'll just leave it at that. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and appreciate the time that you let us present and being here. So thank you so much.
Thanks to both of you. I'll turn to commissioners for questions for the opponents. After this, what we'll do is go back to the applicant for rebuttal and closing. But questions for the opponents from Vice Chair Bailey, Commissioner Giraldo. You're on mute, Commissioner.
I have no questions. I read all the arguments and all of the exhibits, which were comprehensive. I would like to hear Mr. Warner at some point, though.
Okay, will do.
No questions.
Okay. I don't have any questions as well. I would like to hear from Mr. Warner as well, if you have any thoughts or reactions to this. But before we do that, let me turn to Mr. Lynch, and I give you an opportunity for rebuttal. And then I'm going to hold off on your closing. I'm going to ask to hear from Mr. Warner before your closing. But if you have any rebuttal from what you heard from the opponents.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, during the testimony of Ms. Grover, you heard that we should be looking at other master plans that they find appropriate. But the bottom line is that we're looking at, we're basing these determinations on the master plan that controls in this situation. That's the most recently approved master plan for Bowie. You just can't go willy-nilly picking which master plan you want to use to support your case. You have to look at that which is the most recently approved. As the PMA impacts, first is with regard to the outfall associated with the storm management pond. That outfall is located in an area which would cause the least amount of disturbance. Again, we're utilizing a stormwater management pond as opposed to an underground detention facility because it is the preferred method of controlling stormwater. So we're trying to design the site, with an eye on what are the preferred methods for controlling stormwater in Prince George's County. And therefore, we are utilizing what obviously would be an area that was going to be cleared for a sediment control pond, converting that to storm management pond, and then constructing an outfall down to the stream, which is where DPI prefers storm management stormwater to end up. So again, we did this with an eye on complying with DPI's desired manner for controlling stormwater, and then design that outfall in a manner where it would have the least amount of impacts. Staff recognized this, and staff therefore recommended this board approve those impacts. As to the impacts associated with the road, I have to note, and this board knows this is not the first approval. We've had a comprehensive design plan approved, and you've had a preliminary plan approved. This board approved some of the impacts associated with Queen Anne Court when it reviewed the comprehensive design plan and when it reviewed the specific design plan. These, the initial impacts were already approved. These are impacts, additional impacts that our engineer discovered when it was further engineering that road. And it was and those plans are being reviewed by DPI that determined there would be some additional impacts associated with the construction of that road. So again, a lot of stuff that's before this board, this is not the first time you've seen it. These are not the original impacts. With regard to the road, this is just an expanded impact that's associated with an impact previously approved by this board. As to the opposition contention of the views from Leland Road, again, the view that we provided to you was from a portion of Leland Road. There is an area located further to the west where there'll be a stormwater management pond installed. There is also an area further to the west where the master developer had to clear some of the trees for a temporary construction entrance. As indicated during my testimony, we'll be compliant with 4.6. 4.6 does not require that you cannot see the building. 4.6 requires that we install a 20-foot landscape buffer. But again, as demonstrated in my exhibit, for majority of the National Capital frontage on Leland Road, there will be a significant woodland conservation area maintained. There are exceptions to that, and where we do create some disturbance, they're proposing 4.6 compliance. As to the opposition contention that you shouldn't be reviewing these when you have, reviewing this application, excuse me, when you have a CDP that has not been certified, when you have a basic plan that's still under review. The bottom line, and again, this is not the first time you've heard this argument, the bottom line is that section 27532 of the zoning ordinance allows for the combined review of basic plan, CDP, preliminary plan, and specific design plan. That being said, there's always going to be issues that are kind of up in the air. And hopefully all those issues are addressed by the time we get to certification, which is what we're attempting to do here. So again, since you have the ability to review these contemporaneously, that means that there's going to be issues that are still outstanding, and you clearly have the authority under 27532 to review this SDP before, for instance, the CDP is certified. And then finally, with regard to public facilities, again, arguments were made during the preliminary plan review for National Capital with regard to public facilities, but this board made a determination that there be adequate facilities in place to serve this development. I believe the opposition during that case also raised the issue with regard to us not being within the accepted travel time for EMS. But again, there's mitigation factors. We're implementing those mitigation factors, and therefore this board is, at the time of preliminary plan, was able to make the finding with regard to adequate public facilities, and therefore can make the same finding on this case. So again, we believe that this application meets the requirements for the approval of a specific design plan. And again, we respectfully request this board support and approval of this specific design plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Before I give you your final word, there's a request to hear from our counsel as well, Mr. Warner. And as you're addressing this, what Mr. Lynch talked about was one of the pieces that I wanted to hear from you. You may have addressed it, but you may have more to say too, which is this whole issue of what shall be met and what will be met in advance of approval. He already spoke to it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. And Commissioner Giraldo, do you have any other things specifically that you want to hear from Mr. Warner?
No, I just wanted to hear from Mr. Warner with respect to the legal issues and the fact that it's before the Maryland Court of Appeals granted cert.
Mr. Warner, you're
Sure.
prepared to respond, or do you need a few minutes?
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure I've got down all the questions. Right. Obviously, there's a lot in the testimony from all sides on the question of findings, and I leave that to the staff and to the testimony to discuss whether the findings were met. And so I'll talk about the legal issues. The first issue that Ms. Vota brought up was this case of Maryland Reclamation Associates v. Harford County. And she said that it stood for the proposition that citizens are permitted to raise an issue at an administrative hearing about the validity of a law. Well, that case actually dealt with a different issue. What it said is that if you own land and you're before an administrative body, you need to bring up the issue about a law being invalid at that time if you want to address it on appeal. But that being said, nothing in these planning board's procedures ever prevent a citizen from testifying that a law is invalid. It happens all the time. So there's no problem with Ms. Vota addressing that issue. And this board has authority to determine whether a law that in their opinion is valid or not, or constitutional or not. I mean, that is within our authority as a planning board, which is fine. Ms. Vota, they provided some cases in the backup, but none of those show that the particular law that she's claiming is illegal is illegal. It actually, that law contains several provisions that I would say could potentially constitute its validity if it ever was challenged, but it hasn't been challenged. And we have no basis, in my opinion, to declare it invalid. That all being said, the issue in that particular law was the decision on the district council's part to establish several permitted uses for this particular district that this project is being developed in. When we are reviewing a specific design plan, we're not making a decision about whether a use is legal or not. A developer will say, this is what we're going to use the property for, and then we evaluate the design of that plan to make sure that it can handle the use that they propose to conduct on the property. When they go in and get their permits for use and occupancy of the property, that's the point where they'll have to show that their use is permitted. That's just not an issue for us at this point. So I think that the issues she's bringing up are not really relevant to our decision on this SDP. So that was one of the legal issues I saw.
Mr. Chairman, may I be heard on this issue briefly?
We're past that point. Thank you, Ms. Vota.
And then I've never heard of someone distinguishing between contingencies and conditions in the way that Ms. Vota is creating a duality there of some kind. All of our approvals involve conditions, and there are certain issues that we just do not have the expertise to decide for ourselves. And the one that she brings up in particular, stormwater, is something that is approved by those with the expertise in it at the county. And so that's why our own law itself requires us to rely on the county's determination as to whether stormwater impacts are acceptable. And when the county has time to make that decision, they make it. Now, unfortunately, the law already imposes on us very strict time limits for our decision making as a planning board. And so there are times where we are not able to make a decision at the time we're reviewing a specific design plan because of these time limits. So what do? We do not allow the project to move forward without those approvals. we condition or make contingent our approval on that, in this case, for instance, the concept plan being approved. So it's just it's in the course of our business.
David, Mr. Warner, hold on one sec. There's somebody who's speaking into the mic. I'm not sure it's anyone whose camera is visible. We're starting to hear some background noise. Give us 1 sec. I think we're okay. Keep going.
Right. So so I don't think there's anything more to be said about contingent versus contingency. We are under the requirements that the county and in certain cases state law have imposed upon us in terms of time limits. So we have to make some decisions and rely on those experts that can make the final decision to make that decision, and then our final approval will be contingent on that. It's absolutely appropriate. I think I would just make a quick comment on the law of general plans and master plans that Ms. Grover spoke about. I don't think it should be implied, if so it was implied or actually said by Ms. Grover, that the master plan has no relevance with this application. It's quite the opposite. When the basic plan that authorizes the rest of these development approvals to proceed was approved, it was only approved because it conformed to the applicable master plan. When this preliminary plan for this project was approved, it was only approved because it conformed to the applicable master plan. So the master plan isn't out of this process entirely and being ignored by us. Actually, it gets reviewed at more than one time in the development process. So it just so happens now we're at the final design phase of this project. We've made the determination that the master plan is met through the previous approvals. Now we're trying to figure out what is the specific design going to be for this property. Can it handle the use that they proposed? Are the buildings going where they're supposed to be going? Are the roadways appropriate? All of the design elements that are impacted in a specific design plan are what's before you today. So it's not correct to say that the master plan has just been completely avoided by us. And then with regard to jurisdiction, the suggestion was made because some of the earlier approvals have been appealed, that for some reason we can't hear this case. That is not appeals do not impact the planning board's jurisdiction. We made our approval on the conceptual design plan. We made our approval on the preliminary plan of subdivision. Those approvals are valid and binding, and then we use them to make our determination in the next step of the development process. Whether they get appealed or where they are in some appeal process doesn't affect our jurisdiction unless eventually we're to get to a court of law and the court were to direct us not to take any further action. But that's not the case with any of the approvals in this particular case. And then the last issue that Mr. Giraldo referred to was an issue that Ms. Vota's firm has on cert to the Court of Appeals regarding a use on a different project. And I guess her argument is because the Court of Appeals wants to look at the issue of use in that project, and that use is similar to this use, then we can't move forward with approval of the specific design plan. Well, first, as I said earlier, we're not approving the use at this stage of the project. So that wouldn't be relevant if it was at all. Secondly, the only evidence we have regarding that particular use in the other project is that the circuit court found it appropriate. So the best evidence we have is that that use actually is legal. So even if we were to apply, the best evidence we have is that our finding earlier on that use in a different project was legal. So none of that, I think, would lead the planning board to have any grounds to reject the SDP on that basis. I think those are the legal issues that I heard from Ms. Vota and Ms. Grover.
Thank you. So there's a request from Commissioner here from Council. We have heard from Council. I appreciate that. Any other questions for Council? I'll turn back to Mr. Lynch for your closing, if you have one.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, just briefly, again, I think Mr. Warner, you can touch upon this. This is the final step in the approval process for this particular portion of the National Capital Business Park. And that step, doesn't move forward without the prior steps, obviously. We've had, a preliminary plan approved. We had a CDP approved. We've had an SDP for infrastructure. And determinations made in each and every one of those cases impacts determination made here today. So again, with specific regard to the transportation facilities, you made that determination just a few weeks ago on the preliminary plan. And again, overall, the determination made with regard to the impact on the regulated environmental features, you've made in part those determinations. What we requested here is just an expanded impact. And again, nothing that we really control, but as a result of the permitting process, DPI, where we determined during the review that we require to create additional impacts. So again, overall, we believe that this has met the criteria for approval. We believe that this is probably the most appropriate place for this particular building. We believe that the applicant as well as the master developer spent a lot of time finding a site within this development where this building would have the least amount of impact on the surrounding uses, and we believe we've accomplished that. So with that, we believe that we've complied with the requirements set forth in the zoning ordinance, and we look forward to this board's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. So give the applicant the final word. So we are closing this hearing unless there's any other questions from my fellow commissioners for Mr. Lynch or others. Not? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all very much for this. And commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, based upon staff's evaluation and analysis by staff, the testimony of witnesses and the exhibits, I move that the board adopt the findings of the technical staff report and approve SDP 1603-02 and Type 2 Tree Conservation Plan TCP 2-026-2021-02 for National Capital Park Business Park, subject to the staff's conditions as modified by applicant's exhibit number 1, with the exception of 1P, which shall be in the resolution as read into the record by Mr. Lynch and approved by Mr. Zhang.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call the roll. Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 3-0. Thank you all very much. We have a companion case, the draft resolution, item 8, draft resolution PGCPB number 2022-76, SDP 160302, National Capital Business Park. Mr. Zhang, turn it over to you if you want to sort of tee this one off.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. For the record, this is Henry Zhang with Urban Design Section. Yeah, basically, we're going to include those changes in this resolution. And but before, I want to add a couple of things. One is that this SDP is only limited to the 90-ish acre of the larger property. So anything beyond that is not, is outside the purview of the planning board, even though the issue mentioned several times larger piece, but this.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. This is James Hunt with the Development Review Division. We want to. I apologize, Mr. Zhang. We want to make sure we incorporate and embody the planning board's decision that's already taken place, and that we will do so within the resolution that's already been encompassed here. So we'll go and do that with the changes that have been made. That's pretty much about it for the Development Review Division. We just request the planning board's approval of the resolution at this point.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, and thank you, Mr. Hunt. And Mr. Warner, I assume you have all you need. as well.
Yes, the record includes what needs to be revised in this draft resolution, and the motion will, if made, will encompass those changes.
Okay, thanks. So we'll leave it at that. Who do we have?
We have to move for the approval of the resolution as will be which will incorporate the changes that we discussed, consistent with the motion.
We do. Before we do that, though, on this case, we actually have a speaker, Ms. Grover, who signed up on this resolution as an opponent as well. I'm checking with Mr. Warner, but I believe it's appropriate for her to have the opportunity to speak on this, correct?
You're welcome to allow Ms. Grover to speak if she, her testimony, though, should be relevant just to the language of the resolution.
All right, so Ms. Grover, the floor is yours. Again, just relevant to the language of the resolution.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just signed up in case I wanted to say something, but I don't need to say anything. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so we're back before us, the draft resolution. We've heard from staff. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we adopt the resolution once it's written in accordance with the motion that we did in approving STP and what's 1603-2, as well as a TCP and the additional revised conditions and the condition as read into the record.
Second, and I think you've captured it. Let's make sure.
Mr. Warner, that's good. Thumbs up. We got a thumbs up.
Okay, thank you. Good job, Mr. Giraldo.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion on the motion, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Vice Chair Bailey.
Vote aye.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it 3-0. Thank you, everybody. We have, I believe, that concludes all the items for today's agenda. Mr. Hunt, is there anything else before us?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's pretty much about all the agenda items before the planning board today. Thank you all.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would like to acknowledge before we leave that we do have now on the Supreme Court Justice Brown Jackson, and her father went to North Carolina Central, and so did I. I had to say that. We're excited about her being on the Supreme Court today.
Well said. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Anything else that commissioners you'd like to add, bring up?
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Warner mentioned something about legislation at the outset.
There is legislation that is relevant to us, but based on the timing, we don't need to take this up for discussion until our next meeting.
Okay,
so,
great.
We'll get the backup information before the next meeting, and then we'll have a chance to discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If there's nothing else before us, then this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for your time.